coach, life coach, life on life's terms coach. This is the Grinch, and Grinch is being a grumpy little Gus. Grinch is grumpy. Whew. So, what we're going to talk about tonight is usually I pick a topic for the week. And we talked about a lot of the things last week that were really important. We talked about, the ACE evaluation. We talked about childhood trauma. That's the ACE evaluation is the adverse childhood, evaluation. Um, yeah. So we did that last week. And so what it calls for is what happens is when you grew up in these environments, we didn't learn boundaries. We learned survival skills and we learned to adapt to those survival skills. And so part of changing so that we aren't victimized, because you might have been victimized in some way, shape, or form as a child, or maybe even in your, middle school, or maybe in another way, you know, but however way it affected you, and it causes us to shrink is what it does. And when we shrink, we tend to become a victim for others. Thank you for those hearts. Is that you, Kim? We tend to become a victim. And we don't say, I'm a victim. Oh, it's Mama. I know Grinch ain't being very sweet, though. It is Kim. Hi, girl. Hi. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow night, darling. So we got Mom and Kim in the house. So yeah, the Grinch isn't acting very nice tonight, y'all. Hopefully Grinch will go to bed pretty soon. Grinch and I'll be meditating after this. Hello, Greg. How are you this evening? How are you doing? We're going to we talked about a lot of things that happen in the childhood. Hello, Digger Nick. We talked about a lot of things that happen in the childhood, the ACE value. Oh my goodness, 2 wisdom teeth pulled. Oh, darling, hugs, hugs. You feel still got that stuff in your mouth? Can you feel your, oh goodness. John London, we missed you the other evening. What was it? It was Robbie was telling us the other night. He's like, I missed John London. We missed you. So we're glad that you're here this evening. Thank you for all the hearts, Kim. So we're going to talk about boundaries tonight. I loved your post today, by the way, Kim. Thank you, John. It's great to see you again, too. So we're talking about this evening. Last week, we talked about the ACE test, childhood trauma, and all of these. So how do we grow from there? And boundaries are a part of it. And a lot of times boundaries are, we don't set boundaries because we're afraid of conflict and confrontation. Sometimes we're afraid. Most of the people that I work with, isn't that sweet? Hello, big boy gamer. Most of the people that I work with, they say to me, they're like, well, boundaries are scary because I don't want other people to feel rejected. But here's the thing. Here is the thing. When we're afraid of we're going to talk about boundaries and the difference between appreciation and obligation. Because this is, there's also a difference between discernment and judgment, but they can be on a very thin line. But Mama, I called you first thing in the morning. Sometimes that be's that way. So boundaries have a very thin line, with obligation and appreciation and being able to know the difference. So hopefully tonight we'll be able to know the difference. So I forgot what I was talking about. That's why I have these notes here, so I can remember what I was talking about. And so clear boundaries are important and can lead to, yes, absolutely, John London. Thank you for that. Clear boundaries are very important, but we didn't learn how to set boundaries, did we? A lot of times growing up, just like boundaries, they didn't even start talking about boundaries as far as I know. Melody Beattie wrote the books, and Pia Melody Beattie and Pia Melody, both 2 melodies with different, yeah, they spelled it the same way. But Melody Beattie, The Codependent's Guide to the 12 Steps. There was also Codependent No More before that and some other things. So they started talking about that when Betty Ford Hazelton, it used to be mandated in the Betty Ford Hazelton clinic to have boundaries because like Melody Beattie and Dr. Drew said that, the addictions, and it could be, we talked about in this, the addictions could be food, alcohol, drugs, shopping, work, chaos, drama, and everything else. And so those things may may call for boundaries. Look at Kim. Good going, girl. Um, so hi, Jim C. And we're talking about boundaries. The things we don't talk about on here, we don't talk about religion. We can talk about spirituality because, but we don't talk about any certain religions. We don't tell people what they need to be doing with religion. We don't talk about politics. And we sure don't talk about my age. Those are boundaries I set. Yet can lead to being used and abused, walked over, and just neglecting ourselves. Absolutely. And that's why I started having to learn boundaries, because I got called a doormat. One of the people who told me that that I was codependent. That's why I bring a lot of attention to codependency on here, because a lot of people have a misconception on what codependency is. They think that it means, oh, I'm I'm dependent on somebody else, and that's not necessarily the case. Codependents can be rescuers and people pleasers, these kind caretakers. A lot of this, codependency spans a long way. So definitely in codependency is why we have to learn boundaries, or else we will be a doormat. And I was called a doormat, and I was also called codependent, and I just blew it off because it's like, I didn't think that was a nice word, just like we don't think narcissism is a nice word, right? But we don't necessarily know what it means until we do. And so these are definitely reasons that we need to have boundaries, but we need to have loving boundaries. And so a lot of times, like I was saying earlier, a lot of people don't feel comfortable setting boundaries because they tell me usually, well, I don't want anyone to feel rejected because I know what it feels like to be rejected. What they don't think about is that they're not wanting to feel rejected too. So everything's a projection, and we didn't learn this, and we don't know this, a projection or a reflection. And so when we're afraid somebody else is going to be hurt if we set a boundary, we're also afraid we're going to be hurt if we set a boundary, because we are afraid of rejection still if we're afraid to set in a boundary. Thank you, Sankey. Okay. Grinch, I'm glad Grinch went back in his house. He was on a tear. He thought I was going to go out, I think, because I put some lips on. But anyway, um, the boundaries. So I had to learn how to set loving boundaries, because sometimes a lot of people also, he is very protective of me. A lot of times people are afraid of conflict and confrontation, because if you grew up in a violent household, boundaries to you might look like cussing, screaming, tires squealing out the driveway, um, all this kind of thing. So that can be, Grinch is, and I'm afraid I might be codependent with Grinch too. But, we have each other, and that's a lot. All right. Thank you, Kim. So I don't have the doors open so he can fly away. Sankey, okay? So yes, I have to set boundaries with Grinch. So when Grinch bites me and hurts me, I have to set boundaries with Grinch. Like, you hurt me. All right, we don't talk about politics on here. Thank you, though. I hope you're able to get something out of this. So, boundaries, the difference between appreciation and obligation. I'm going to start getting into it. But the thing is we need to get comfortable with setting boundaries with ourselves first. Because the problem is the reason we don't set boundaries is sometimes we're taught to sacrifice, and we don't even consider ourselves. So you might have grown up in a home where they said you sacrifice is loving other people. And that's, loving other people should be mutual. We need to love ourselves because we can't give from an empty cup. So that's the thing. So here we grow, y'all. And I'm looking at your comments. Thank you so much for being here and participating. I know, right, John London? It is weird. I've had this bird for 10 years. 10 years. The bird's 10 years old. And he depends on me. I won't get another bird whenever anything happens. This bird could live 10 or 15 years more, but I'm not getting another bird after this. So here's the conversation tonight. For anyone healing from childhood trauma, codependency, addiction, or self-abandonment, okay? Many of us were taught that love means sacrifice. I know that my dad used to say that it was sacrifice. And so being a good partner, parent, child, or friend means overgiving, overfunctioning, and putting everyone else first. A lot of people think that that's love, but you can't give from an empty cup. And so in codependency, people are so overextended and they're not loving themselves, so they tend to take things personally. You were very attached to your cat as well? Yep, these pets, and they're so innocent though. Well, Grinch is kind of sometimes innocent when he's not biting me. Hey, Robbie, it's good to see you tonight. So thank y'all for being here. So we're digging into this. We just got started, Robbie, so welcome. All right. Sachink Kumar, hello, but I'm not your mom, but thank you. Often what we call love is actually an obligation. A lot of people feel obligated, right? And so obligation sounds like this. It sounds like I have to, or I should, or they need me. If I don't do this, something bad will happen, or I'm responsible for their emotions. You aren't responsible for people's emotions. People do what they do because that's what they want to do. And people feel the way that they feel because that's the way that they know how to feel. We aren't responsible for that, because I can tell you as a codependent that I tried to heal others, my pain, through healing others. And I could not heal my pain through healing others. I had to heal my own pain. You see, that's why the boundaries have to start with me, because when we don't consider ourselves, and self-esteem starts with you. Self-esteem starts with ourself. And so if we don't consider ourselves, we are not going to have self-esteem. If we're trying to be everything for everybody, and I used to get accused of that, being everything for everybody, because I tried. And so we talked about last week about all the roles that we learn to play so that people would like us, appreciate us, and love us, and that we learn to perform to be safe. And so boundaries are what actually keep us safe, but we have to learn how to set boundaries. I had a friend I talked to earlier today. I said, you really need to look up CODA, because she's telling me, I'm trying to set boundaries, but she don't know how to set boundaries. We don't know how to we didn't learn how to set boundaries if we were doormat. No one talked about that back in the days. So it was something, like I said, came about 70s and 80s when Betty Ford Hazelton, clinic came, and they mandated codependency because a lot of people didn't know what it is. And so if you get this book, if you get curious, you can look up a lot of information on codependency. When you talk to somebody, how people know when we're codependent is if you talk to somebody and you say, how are you doing? And they say, well, this person's doing this and this person's doing that, then you might be codependent. If you talk to somebody and you say, how are you feeling? And they'll be like, I don't know, this person, when they attach it to somebody else, this is codependency. When your happiness is attached to somebody else's happiness, happiness is an inside job. So here we grow. Obligation, I told y'all what it sounds like, that I have to, I should, so they need me. And if I don't do this, we think that everything's hinged on us doing it. And I had to learn that that is very arrogant to think that I have to do everything. No one else will do it if we don't. And what we're telling people when we feel like we have to do it all the time is that we don't think that they're capable. It's like, oh, you're not capable, so let me do it. Maybe we don't say that. Sometimes we take on other people's stuff, and maybe that's not what we're saying, but we're not allowing them to grow a self-esteem when we do that. John, the boundaries that I did set have been repeatedly broken by a few people because either my boundaries were weak, not maintained, or I'm stuck in a situation and proves can't escape. Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing is that, a lot of times I used to set boundaries, but it would be like, but people don't take me seriously because I wasn't setting them from the inside. I was setting them from the fear of rejection outside, or the fear of what was going to happen outside, and then it would be like, nobody ever listens to me. Nobody ever listens to me. And I used to do that. So a lot of times we're trying to, like, I told y'all that I had a client that, I told her that because she didn't feel comfortable just saying no when her family wanted to borrow money. It is a cycle. It's hard. It's hard. That's why I say loving boundaries, because we do need to set them with ourselves, because we need to love ourselves. Because what happens is we try to set boundaries if we try to do things out of obligation, we end up resentful. because we may overextend ourselves trying to help somebody. Okay. May overextend ourselves trying to help somebody. And when they don't do what we want them to do, and they don't have the results, and they keep needing help over and over, if we keep helping them over and over and bitching about it, a B word for the day, then they are going to, we're teaching them that that's okay. We teach people how to treat us. And so if we, sometimes people will say a good way that we need boundaries sometimes is I've heard people say, I told them I would take them here. And then when I got them in the car, they wanted to go here, 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 and here. Good. Thank you, First Paper. I'm glad that you're here. So what happens is if you take them here, 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 and here, and without setting a boundary, what's going to happen? You're going to maybe get behind on your own things. And then you're going to be upset that you did all of this. And then they may go back to doing whatever it is they're doing and still not get things done and then expect you. See, we develop expectations out of obligations. Robbie, we must learn there are professionals that are very capable of taking over when we have reached out on boundaries. Yes. So, yes, 100% loving ourselves. Yes. Because if we don't love ourselves, we won't honor ourselves. And if we don't honor ourselves, we're going to talk smack about somebody else when their results aren't their results aren't happening the way that we wanted them to happen. So that's when we're taking their stuff on, right? And so, or we're talking smack to ourselves about ourselves. Why did I do this? I do this every time. And so it's to learn to have a loving dialogue and relationship with ourselves. So that's why I say we have to get comfortable setting boundaries with ourselves first. But setting boundaries with someone else can't be all of a sudden twisted about all these rules. Boundaries aren't rules. So it's not about creating all these rules. It's like, from now on, we're going to do this, this, and this. And it'd be like, if somebody gets in a car with you and they want to go one place, they tell you one place, and then when they get you, they hold you hostage. There's a term called holding you hostage. This is people who talk to you incessantly about the same problems all day, every day, over and over, but they're not looking for solutions. They're just looking to bitch about their problems. Maybe some people got time for that, but most of us do not, and most of us get drawn in and it drains our energy, right? This is a need for setting boundaries, and so that's what we do. Thank you, Robbie. Is so learning how to say, I said I would take you one place. You're going to have to get a ride for the other stuff. I've got things to do. I hope this goes well. Yes, thank you, John London. Yeah. So it's about learning to set loving boundaries. Sometimes you just got to tell people, you said you wanted to go to this place, so I have other plans today. So maybe you can get somebody else to give you a ride, okay? And then you just go drop them off at home. That's what you do. Don't let people hold you hostage. I've had people try to talk to me about things that weren't even of interest to me. And it's okay. That doesn't mean they're a bad person. It doesn't mean they're a boring person. It doesn't mean anything. It means that we aren't on the same, I don't have anything in common. So I'm not going to sit there and be disinterested and just pretend like I'm interested, because my time is valuable. Thank you, Lucky Alade. My time is valuable. And this is what people get to learn. People get to learn you're not going to call Stacy at 8 or 9 at night. I don't even answer any messages at 8 or 9 at night unless somebody's behind is falling off. If they're, everyone who knows me knows, and this is a boundary. And, it was funny because one of my girls, because I sponsor girls with addiction, and one of my girls had called me like at 9 o'clock at night, and she was like, oh, I almost forgot to call you. And I said, girl, you did forget to call me, because if you don't call me before 9, it's better to forget to call me than call me after 9 o'clock. Because at that time I had kids that were teenagers. And so if somebody called me after 9, my heart would get to going, did my kids get in trouble? And so she wasn't mad at me, because I set that boundary with her. She said it taught her how to set boundaries, to value her own time, and so we teach people how to treat us. Yes, I am naturally blonde. Yeah, recognizing that instead of being a people pleaser is supposed to be natural. Yeah, But we didn't learn. We might have learned to be a people pleaser. At one time, it served us. So it's not bad that we've been people pleasers. We don't want to label ourselves or anybody else. And that's the reason that we need to honor ourselves and honor someone else. Because if a lot of times we come from these labels and we're trying not to be something, right? We're like, I don't want to be like this person. I don't want to be mean. I don't want to reject people. I don't want to. And so what we want to do is say, I want to honor people. I want to honor myself. So when I, suggest, thank you, Amadou Gamer. So when I suggest to people, setting boundaries when they're not comfortable with no, you know, to say, I don't know, let me think about it. When somebody asks them, you got to look them in the eyes, John London. You got to look them in the eyes and let them know, I don't know, let me think about it. Because you got to look confident. Because people will walk there's boundary hunters too. There are indeed boundary hunters. And anybody who's dealing with anybody in addiction probably has a boundary hunter because they don't have boundaries. I didn't have boundaries in my addiction, and so I'm not running at the mental capacity if I'm in my addiction. I'm not running at a mental capacity where I can consider others. See, this is the thing is they're not considering you. It's totally me, 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 me. It was with me, and I still have to catch myself. Boundaries are self-love. Yes, they are. That it's not about me because that was the things that I learned when I was in the CODA program is it's not all about me, that I don't have to fix everything. I don't have to, I don't got to, I don't need to. And all of this, I am whole. I don't need to people please. I don't need to caretake. What I need to do is do what I want to do. So now when people ask me to do things, they know that I'm not just saying it to be nice when I'm, being nice. They know I'm not just saying it to be nice because that's not what I do, because I do know boundaries. I have boundaries with myself. I'm not going to try to make somebody else feel good, you know, or feel bad. I'm not trying to make anybody feel any kind of way. I try to, even as a coach, I just try to help people realize, what they're saying to me and repeat it back. And so we try to find solutions for things, but it's never about you should do this, you should do that. I'm not telling people what to do. It's not about control. See, that's the thing. Is we don't realize sometimes in codependency when we're doing all these things and we don't have boundaries that we are indeed manipulating another person because we don't want them to reject us. That's the thing is we don't want to be rejected. So we're running off the whole tape and energy of I don't want to be rejected. I don't. Oh my goodness. Surround sound all on the wall. The boundary waters in Minnesota are pretty. Well, that's good. Hard to please, Scott. Glad you're here. So I'm going to get back to my notes right quick. So obligation is often rooted in guilt, fear, anxiety, and over responsibility. And these were learned behaviors maybe in your family. If you're an oldest child, you might have learned over responsibility. You might have thought, I have to take care of everything, right? Anxiety, if there was always fights in the home and things like this, or you were afraid of certain things, if you were afraid of getting whooped yourself, you're going to have some anxiety. And so a lot of times people's nervous systems, if you're an adult and you're afraid of another adult, this is your inner child screaming at you because when we're adults, I know, right, Kim? When we are adults, we should not fear another adult. And if we're in a situation where we're afraid of another adult, we probably we need to get some help first to make sure that we are legit, that because sometimes what happens is if you just leave that situation, if it's not dangerous or physically abusive, it could be mentally and emotionally abusive, but a lot of people don't know when it's mentally and emotionally abusive. That's insightful. There's a symptom of ADHD called RSD, rejection sensitivity. Yes, yes. Yeah, Robbie, not letting our self-control get out of control, trying to help others, right? Right? And so, exactly, it's being able to know ourselves. Are we being too sensitive, like John said? Because sometimes I have been sensitive, and that's why it's been good for me to have a coach, a therapist to talk to, because I had a sponsor Sometimes I would go to my sponsor and say something to my sponsor. Sometimes she said what I wanted to hear. Sometimes she didn't say what I wanted to hear. So then I would go to my therapist, and my therapist had a way of putting things to me that made sense, you know? And so that, that was very helpful to change my mind because I definitely needed to change my mind when I think that I have to do everything, when I think that I have to be over responsible, when I think that if I don't do it, nobody else will, when I think that, this and all these things that end up causing me to feel overstressed. And codependency is so easy to slip into. I slipped into it after I had done the work on codependency. I slipped back into it. I had a friend that was dying, and her family, one of her daughters was pregnant in one state and the other daughter was in another state. So I was taking care of her like 18 hours a day. I was sleeping at her house, and people ask me, why did you do that, Stacy? Why were you so? Because, she worked on her addiction. She did all her steps on her addiction. It was a sponsee. Then she did 10 of her steps on codependency, and then I stayed there for a while, and then I started going mad. I wanted to get a therapist to help me deal with her dying, and then her daughters and them didn't get the hospice approved, so I didn't get a therapist. So I had to tell them, look, I'm not going to do this anymore. This is affecting my mental health, and did they get pissed? They did get pissed. One of my other persons in recovery told me, Stacy, it's arrogant. I did this for a while too, and it was arrogant for me, I got called out that it was arrogant for me to think that I had to do it because nobody else is going to do it and they're not going to find another solution as long as you keep doing it. They'll let you. So sometimes when it comes to your mental health, when it comes to your own sanity, you have to set a boundary, and it's easy to slip back into codependency. It's hard to not slip back into codependency, especially when you love people. So codependents think if you need me, you won't leave me. That's fear of abandonment. Absolutely, Angela. That's absolutely right. It's fear of abandonment. And so we have to look at that, right? Is that we don't know that it's fear of abandonment when we're saying yes. I like what Lisa Nichols says, that you got to get comfortable with your yeses for your nos to mean anything. That's why when people know that I want to do something, because they know that if I don't want to do something, I'll say no. No, thanks. I don't have to, it doesn't mean that I don't like them, that I don't like it, but I have to set boundaries with myself. I like what one of my spiritual teachers said. He said that, to ask ourselves, can I afford it mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and financially? And, if you're overrun by three, or something, or even one of them is valid enough to say, no, let me think about it, or no, not this time. Because maybe it's something, sometimes I have to say no to things that I want to do, you know? So obligation, like I said, is rooted in guilt, fear, anxiety over responsibility, and that fear of a lot of fears. Appreciation feels different. Appreciation says, I choose this. This is empowering. Appreciation says, I choose this. I want to give. I can care without carrying. I can love without abandoning myself. You see, codependents give to get love, approval, safety, etc. That's very true, Angela. You know what you're talking about on the codependence for sure. And I had codependency issues, and I've worked on it for 22 years. And I work with other people with that. Rodolfo, no, they didn't ban me from the funeral, but they gave me the business at the funeral. They didn't speak to me, and after I'd spent more than the majority of the time she was dying, they did. When I went to the funeral, they gave me the business. John, it's always hard at first to recognize the patterns, fears, and then get out of the situation and set boundaries. Right. But it's never too late. You can always, take a step back and claim it, own it. See, that's the thing. And in codependency, we feel like we've got to, and this and that. We're giving other people our power, and it's hard to own our own power. And this is where boundaries come in. And that's why I say we got to set them with ourselves, get comfortable setting them with ourselves, asking ourselves, can I afford it mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and financially? Because sometimes we over obligate ourselves, So Setting the boundaries with ourselves feels comfortable, and then we'll be in our power when we say, no, not this time. Don't think so. Or no, thank you. My daughter laughed at me because, used to when we would sit at lights together or something and someone come up with their cup and wanted to offer me to give them some money, I would say, no, thank you. And my daughter's like, Mom, why are you telling them thank you? And I'm like, well, they offered me to give them some money. So I just say, no, thank you. I'm not judging them. I don't know what they're going to spend this money on. I think that they really wanted some money, and that's all. And sometimes I have it to give and sometimes I don't have it to give. And so I don't feel guilty, but there was a time in my life when I would feel guilty. The first time I came to Mexico, I felt guilty when I saw, some poor people, and I ended up buying a lot of stuff I did not need. So sometimes we can feel guilty and obligated from that guilt. So that's like when we have these relationships, like Angela, kind of like what Angela was saying, to give to get, give to get. So those are transaction relationships, is when we're given to get or given because of fear. Fear of, if I don't give, then they're going to reject me, because everything's a mirror coming back. So appreciation says, I choose this, I want to give, I can care without carrying, and I can love without abandoning myself. And so boundaries help us to recognize the difference. The difference. Boundaries are not rejection. Boundaries are not punishment. Boundaries are clarity, and boundaries are self-respect. See, a lot of people, I think, are feared that boundaries are rejection or boundaries are punishment. Because a lot of people don't set boundaries until they're overextended and fed up to here. They don't even try to set boundaries, Robbie. We invest a lot of time trying to help others only to realize pointless that they're not wanting help themselves in the first place. Absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of times people are investing, and that's an investment. Investing in yourself is so important. Thank you, Kim. Investing in ourselves to learn how to set boundaries, because we can invest. And I know that for me, like Angela was saying, I would help people and build them up and be codependent and put all my energy into them, and then they would leave. And I would feel like, y'all have heard me say this, I would feel like I wish I would have put this energy into myself. And I finally learned to work on my codependency, to put the energy into myself, to quit blowing people off that say, you're codependent. How about putting some religious stuff about forgiveness when you refuse to have anything to do with someone who's been cruel? Forgiveness is a slippery slope. I posted something about that because forgiveness means forgiving the power that you gave the person over you, or forgiving the instance that whatever it was that happened that caused you to feel hurt. So forgiveness doesn't mean subjecting yourself to whoever hurt your feelings. Sometimes, I've done that before. I used to think that was what forgiveness was. So I don't know if that's, but if you refuse to have anything to do with someone who's been cruel, we have to forgive the power of what their cruelty did, because maybe you're still carrying fear with you. Maybe you're still carrying hate with you. You can just not want to be with somebody, and you can dislike somebody without carrying hate for their cruelty, because I don't like cruel people. I don't, and that's okay. They don't need me to like them. And that's the thing about when we understand about people pleasing, that we don't need to be liked by everybody, and not everybody needs to be liked by us. It doesn't mean that we be cruel back. That's the thing, is when we stand in our own power, I don't need to be cruel back to somebody who's been cruel. John, true, I have given every penny away I've earned, unfortunately, without respecting my own needs. I know, I did it too. And then we get to work on lack mentality, which this isn't the video for that. And it's something that I still work on, is that as long as we're alive, we get to work on changing these patterns that don't serve us anymore, and without judgment. Scobos, yes, ma'am. Rodolfo, when you won't have anything to do with someone who's been cruel. Sometimes you got to go no contact with those folks. But even with those folks, they can be a catalyst for our growth. I think that I'm going to talk about that in here, that hate is a very, very strong feeling, and it's a poison. Resentment is a poison. See, if we don't have boundaries, sometimes we have resentment. because not everybody's going to change, and not everybody we help wants a solution. Some people just want help and they don't want to do anything. Well, we're not talking about my dream growing up, but I'm kind of doing my dream of what I wanted to do when I was growing up. I live in a tropical place and I get to help people and talk to people. Angela, codependents feel resentment because people don't reciprocate. Exactly. Exactly. They don't reciprocate. So codependence, it's transactional, and we don't want to admit that. But when we say, I don't want to hurt them because I don't want them, because I know what rejection feels like, it's a manipulation. See, we don't realize in codependency that we are actually manipulating also. We're trying to manipulate people's views of us. Blind Brian, so nice to catch you here too. Thank you for being here. Good evening, John London. Agreed. Neutralizing the hate cycle is hard, but you end up not giving power and energy to it if you forgive properly. Absolutely. Sometimes you got to go no contact. There have been people that have been mean to me and I go no contact with them, and it's hard. It's hard because some of them, I have loved and maybe I still love them, but when they say love from a distance, it really is a thing. Because even though you can see and maybe even got to share some of that potentiality, just because somebody's got potential doesn't mean that they're on a journey to change. Okay? Maybe you want them to change, but they're not maybe wanting to change. Kalimage, I am talking about boundaries and obligation versus appreciation, because you can appreciate people and still have boundaries. Obligation, people tend to not use their boundaries. Appreciation, you're able to gauge within yourself and appreciate the whole thing, but yet not overextend yourself, not manipulate someone into liking you, and not worry about somebody even liking you, because those who know you and care about you are still going to like you even when you set boundaries, loving boundaries. So it's not about rules. Flying Brian, hate hurts the one who holds it, not the one who's thrown at it. That's right. Angela, have you ever had anger issues when you tried to control your environment? Stacy, some codependents have. Yes, and the reason they have anger issues, and I did too, is that, I would set soft boundaries. I would say, well, when this happens again, then this isn't going to work. But then it would happen again. And then I would set a boundary for a few days, a week, maybe a month. And then when they came back, then I'd be like, okay. And then nothing changes if it doesn't change. And so that's the thing, is that sometimes when we grew up in a home where people split up and got back together, and people split up and got back together, we think that we get a mixed message that that's the way that things are supposed to be, that that's the way it is, that somebody's going to learn their lesson just because they had some distance, right? But no. Now I've learned, as a mature person, that nothing changes unless somebody gets some help, because we can't change things with the same thinking that created the problem. So they have anger because they keep doing the same thing, expecting different results, and their inside anger turns outward eventually, and they're like, I'm always doing everything for everybody and nobody does nothing for me. But here's the thing, is a lot of times people with codependence or people pleasing or caretaking tendencies, they do this as a manipulation, and like you said, they don't want to be abandoned, so they can become indispensable. Like, you can't trade me for anybody else. You can't trade me. So then what happens is that in that indispensability, they take on too much, and they don't let people help them. See, then when they don't say, hey, would you mind doing this? I asked somebody the other day, I said, well, did you ask them? Because they said something about, well, they didn't do this. I said, well, did you ask them? And they're like, no. And it's like, that's an expectation. And we can have expectations. Expectations are hard. And our feelings sometimes get hurt with expectations. And that's one of the things in codependency that I had to work on too, is, just hoping. Expectations sometimes can be just hoping, and things don't turn out how you want. And expectations, as my friend Peggy Sue says, is an appointment with disappointment. So yes, they do have anger issues, and they keep putting up with stuff and putting up with stuff and second guessing themselves at codependence. And then when, they've said, no, I don't like this and I don't like that, but they don't have any power in their voice, and that other people don't believe them and take them seriously, then they get all pissed off. I did too. When I get all pissed off when no one took me seriously, because I didn't back my words up. When a person leaves you and they don't go get help, if they're leaving you because they've been unfaithful, or they're leaving you because you want them to get a job and they don't want to get a job, or they're leaving you because they want to do certain behaviors and you're not okay with it, and then they go away for 2-3 weeks and then come back, unless they got help and are seeking help, they're going to keep doing the same thing. And so are you, when you engage in that, doing the same thing, expecting different results. I like, far as relationships, I talk to people about, anxious attachment and avoidant attachment. And, like Matt Huzzy says, he's like, if a man leaves, and it could be a woman too, if they leave and then they're gone for a few weeks and then they come back, oh, I miss you. And then the person just takes them back. Then, and if they haven't done anything to change whatever drove them apart in the first place, they're going to do that. You're going to end up in this cycle, is what you're going to end up in, because nobody's getting better. They're still doing the same thing. And people say, we're working on it. But are you seeing somebody? Are you talking to somebody? Well, if you're not seeing somebody and you ain't talking to somebody, you're creating the same stuff with the same thinking. That's all. So you have to, do something different to get something different. It's not going to change. Nothing changes if it doesn't change. So boundaries are clarity and boundaries are self-respect. Thank you for your questions and participation, Angela. That's good. I hope that answered it. They do have anger issues. And a lot of it turns inward and outward, inward and outward. It's a projection. You're thinking about going no contact with your baby mama, but I feel bad for my kid. I'm building courage and appreciation for myself to not be manipulated by feelings and put myself first. Sometimes you got to go no contact with them. And it's hard when you have a child involved. I would recommend Dr. Ramani. I don't know if your baby mama is narcissist or whatever. It sounds like, with the control issues and using a baby, that it may be. So I would check out Dr. Ramani with the narcissism. Or if you're feeling manipulated and stuff like this, or there's other folks on here to check out when you've got children, because it is very hard to go no contact when a child is involved. But there's the legal system. Sometimes the legal system's helpful, sometimes they're not so much helpful. So healing is learning that love does not require self-abandonment. So if you struggle with guilt, resentment, people pleasing, overgiving, or difficulty saying no, then this is for you. So how we're setting the boundaries. When I talk about boundaries, one of the most questions that I hear is, how do I create them? So many people understand intellectually that they need boundaries, but when it comes time to actually set them, fear shows up, right? This is heavy, as I don't have the financial independence to go no contact from my mom currently. So learning how to set boundaries. When people, I don't know what your mom does, but when people are berating you, to say, that's not nice, and I'm not going to participate in this. That's what I used to have to say when I lived with somebody who was mean to me and I couldn't leave at the time. I don't know if that's going to be helpful, John London, but sometimes they'll be harping and say, that's not nice, and I'm not going to participate in that. And then go to your room, go somewhere that you feel safe, and do your breathing, because you don't have to be subjected to verbal abuse, if that's what it is. Yeah. Not having to work is good. Okay. Hard Rock, hello. How are you doing this evening? Hard Rock, I've been in that very situation. I had to set some hard boundaries, but I got peace back and self-worth. Yes. Peace. This is what you get when you set boundaries. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's what you get when you set boundaries is you get peace. You get to see who was using you and who is not using you, who really cares, about you. Because people will let you serve them and just have their own agendas if you play into it. Thank you, Hard Rock. Exactly. You get your self-worth, because self-worth starts with self. You have to consider yourself. Can I afford it? Can I afford it mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, financially? And then, if you can't afford to move out right now, set goals. I prayed to be able to move out. Blind Brian, sometimes we create our own heartbreaks through expectations. Yes, we do. That hoping. Yeah. Yeah, we do. Following someone down a bad road we have already traveled is not a good idea, especially letting them lead the way. Stay in our own boundary. Absolutely. You're very welcome, Angela. Thank you. I appreciate your questions and your comments too. Very good. John London, I have to make many changes. I'm sure I can do this. You can do this, John London. Growth is a process. It's not an event. See, this is why a lot of times people that don't know how to set boundaries feel messed up by them, because they think, okay, I'm going to set a boundary and then this is going to be it. You have to stick with the boundary when you set the boundary, because some people will, when you set a boundary, some people will avoid your boundary. They're not going to care. And you have to stay strong in it. A boundary isn't to control other people. A boundary is for your own inner peace, your self-acceptance. For you to learn to accept yourself and not look for other people to accept you. See, this is our manipulation and codependency. We look for acceptance outside of ourselves. We're afraid of what people will think, and we already are carrying unearned guilt sometimes. So we're carrying this guilt around that we haven't healed yet. So we're afraid of the things we haven't healed yet, and so we're projecting that onto somebody else. Okay, I'm 21 and I don't want to have children. Well, a lot of people don't want to have children these days, Ovu. There's nothing wrong with that, I don't think. Hard Rock. Yes, John London. You can, and yes, thank you, Hard Rock. He can. I believe that too. Thank y'all for lifting each other up. This is what this space is for, and I love when I see y'all do that. Behind every successful man stands a surprise mother-in-law. That's funny. We bringing down the birth rates. Let's go. Okay. My daughter says she doesn't know if she's going to have kids. I'm like, this is your body, your decision. I'm not trying to be all up in that. Hard Rock, Flying Brian, Rodolfo Aragon, Vu. That's nice. Yes. Robbie. That's so true, Flying Brian. How you doing, buddy? John London. Yes, that'll help a lot. Good. Good deal. Flying Brian, Robbie Mello. Doing okay. Enjoying a few days off and your stuff. Actus, I miss you too. Welcome. I'm glad that you're here. Imagine working at 8 to 6 p.m. 6 days a week. Robbie, I'm great. Thanks. Good. John London, it's tough. She's a narcissistic. Yeah, I thought she sounded narcissistic and sold my car and stole all my belongings for many years. I always hoped she'd change, but never did. No, she's not going to change, darling. You're going to have to do the changing because she's comfortable being like that. So I typically pray about everything, and so because prayer is kind of like talking to ourselves. A lot of times we are talking to ourselves, and for me, that's kind of like prayer is. But actually, there's a source I believe out there. Life force. There's the electromagnetic field, the quantum field, and I try to stay focused on the quantum field because that's what we want. That's what your creativity comes from the electromagnetic field, your thoughts. What am I thinking? And then the quantum field, when we get focused on what we want our thoughts to be and focused on what do I want, that's what our thoughts need to be. Now, it's easy to go back to what we don't want because that's how our central nervous system sometimes is wired. When we're afraid our mom's going to sell our car or steal our belongings, well, then it's like, what's she going to do next, right? And so we tend to not be breathing as deeply, and we can't focus on how we're going to get to where we want. But when we realize whatever you believe your source to be, y'all know I don't tell y'all what or who to believe, but then to rely on that and not give a person too much power over your life. you know, because inevitably you have to make the changes. And it starts with a belief system. And a lot of times our belief systems were a little bit skewed when we feared abandonment, because you were born worthy. I always tell y'all that. And I know that for myself. We were born worthy. We learned how to perform. We learned how to caretake. We learned how to do a lot of things in order to survive as children, because you can't go anywhere. So you just have to adapt to it. So this is our perception, as our beliefs and our perceptions are in alignment with how we believe that the world is. And so if we want our world to change, we have to change our belief. But a lot of times we can't do that by ourselves. I know I couldn't. I had to have a sponsor. It takes a village. I had to have a sponsor because I'm a Leo and I'm stubborn and hard-headed. It took a sponsor and it took a therapist, life coach, to help me. So, I didn't wake up just one day and say, oh, this is the way that I think. I had to do a lot of work to change my thinking. I had to get somebody to repeat what I said back to me. Narcissists are so hard to deal with, John London. Look at Dr. Romani and also Dr. Les Carter. They're amazing with helping you to understand how you can cope with living with a narcissist. Actus, the more I don't see you, the more beautiful you being. Oh, thank you, Actus. Angela, codependents are always forgiving people who break their boundaries. Yes, they do, because they don't. I did. The forgiveness thing is skewed. And a lot of times, like I said, it comes from mixed messages growing up. Maybe you've seen one of your parents, or both of your parents, get split up and get back together and split up and get back together. And this is how we learn to hope. And we get this longing. And what longing starts feeling normal for our central nervous system. Isn't that crazy? But it does. And we think that that's passion, right? You get to a certain age and you're like, no, it's not passion, it's bullshit. But when we're young and we have a lot of energy in us to fight and to overthink and to do all of these things, we may think that this is passion, and it's not. It's mixed messages that we receive somewhere that I'm not good enough to have a partner who's going to support me and love me. We don't know what that feels like. And a lot of times when people get that, it's so unfamiliar and if you don't have self-worth, you will make up stories, or I made up stories that I could not be compatible with this person. And the only problem with compatibility was that I didn't have a self-worth. And that person saw worthiness in me that I didn't see in myself. And I couldn't measure up I felt like I would have to measure up to something else because I didn't have it. Does that make sense, y'all? Was that anybody else? Yeah, they are always forgiving people, Angela. I did that until I stopped. I finally, said, nope, the boyfriend's not coming back anymore. I finally said, nope, the ex-husband's no contact. The kid's grown. So I bought a camper van to escape and set it on fire. Oh no, I ran away to Japan for a month and 2 phones and 1,000 were stolen. My first night, I can't catch a break, unfortunately. I think you can. We start learning. I have a lot of street smarts, and that will definitely help you develop some street smarts. Yeah. I think you'll catch a break. Keep coming in here and we're going to keep lifting you up because, yeah, you got this. You deserve to be free. You deserve to have peace. Peace is something you can't put a price on. I'm not always where I want to be monetarily, but I have peace. Because then I got a narcissistic boss. It's like, oh, okay. So then I had to leave a job. So I've been doing okay in regards to boundaries. My other problem is that I leave impression on people that I'm afraid to break that image. For example, I worked somewhere and then left years later. Why'd you leave years later? I mean, I'm not saying it was wrong. I just want to know. I'm just curiously asking. So Robbie, I got a child to give away to that lady that doesn't have one. So I do free delivery. Child to give away to that. Oh, okay. There you go. Ovu, I can't call, send them resumes. Okay. He who follows the herd only sees arseholes. Yes, Flying Brian. Rodolfo's laughing. Angela, have you ever been over controlling with your daughter? Some codependents have over. No, I had to work on that. No, I'm not over controlling with my daughter. I think that she may have problems living in my image, because I quit smoking weed, before she was 2 years old, but I quit drinking when she was like 2 years old. So I was an uncool parent, and so I set boundaries with her. I did set boundaries with her, and I set boundaries with her, some years ago, because she did get to where she started talking crazy to me and even bucking up to me. But the cool thing is, Angela, because I got to work on that codependency. I was sober. I got sober almost 29 years ago, clean and sober. But then, 5 years into it, I was still going crazy because people didn't act right, everyone outside of me, because I would try to control people in my codependency. And I would also shrink in my codependency. I would shrink to nothing. And so my therapist sent me to Coda, and that's how I learned about my codependency, because when I would go tell her what was going on with me, or tell anybody what was going on with me, it would always go back to my ex-husband, you know. And so the problem was me, that I disassociated, you see. Because when I was a child, I learned how to build a wall around myself so I couldn't feel my own feelings. That was my codependency. I didn't feel my own feelings. I felt my feelings through other people. And so I wasn't over controlling with her. I was a parent to her. I wasn't a friend, and in a time where the kids are growing up and a lot of parents are friends. Her dad was more of a friend to the kids than I was. He was the cool parent and I was not the cool parent, because I did have structure. We did not have Cokes and chips and things like this in the house. I didn't have that. But so to hear tell, she had to stay home when she was like 13, 14. It's different things. So no, I wasn't over controlling with her. No. I think that it helped her a lot. I let her be her, because I don't think that I really got to be me. Sorry, Mom. I don't, it wasn't my parents didn't know any better, but I was the oldest. And so I took over a lot of roles that, and like I said, back in those days, parents didn't know about codependency. My dad was an addict, so my mom was codependent. So she was all absorbed with him. And so sometimes I would try to make my mom feel better and things like this, and I didn't get to feel my own feelings. So I would be scared sometimes, and I would take my brothers. I would, try to take care of my brothers when I got scared. And so I would get scared a lot, and I didn't understand a lot of things. I mean, I'm from Texas. There was guns involved sometimes. We went on vacation, and then Dad would get out of the car because he would be drunk, and then Mom would be nervous. Then we would go home and load these guns up in the car and take off. And I still don't know if my dad would have shot us with those guns or what we were doing getting those guns out and stuff, but we would leave and then we would go back. So I was very dysregulated, you know. And so I had to learn not to put this stuff on my kids. When I saw their dad begin to act like my dad was when I left him, because I didn't want my kids to experience what I experienced. I was 5 years clean and sober when that happened. And, my ex-husband was not like my dad in the fact that he was, drinking. He just had some rage issues. And when the kids started seeing that, I didn't want my kids to see that, because I saw rage issues with both of my parents, and it dysregulates. And we just try not to rock the boat. We just try to make things go smooth, and we just try to help our parents, and we don't really live our own lives. See, that's the thing. Hello, Iceland, Joe Snuffy. Ovu, just by being well resolved and having a good, stable life, I guess we already end up solving others' problems just by changing our self beliefs. Yeah, but we can't do it by ourselves. At least it depends on how ingrained, embedded, and imprinted it is. See, because we keep telling ourselves because of our belief system over and over. So some people, I'm kind of hard headed. John London, thank you so much. I'll check it out. I just know that I will get a place. Yes, you will. You got a goal set. You will get there. I used to pray under the moons to be able to leave. And so finally I did get to leave when I was in that kind of environment. And when I left, when I was taking out the trash, like the first couple of days, and there was a big full moon out, and I was like, yes, yes, because things come in full circle, right? Angela, any relationship with an unavailable man is a one. Absolutely, absolutely. And that's what we learn. I grew up with a dad that was, unavailable. And so I kept choosing that because it felt comfortable, right? John London. Yep, narcissists being over 1% of the population. I've had the problem at work also, and in the family and in relationships. I know, I didn't know about it. I saw it at work, but I was able to stop. I just quit work. I wish I could have told work why I was quitting. I didn't want to sign this contract, so I just said, but it was becoming very narcissistic and unhealthy. And so I'm like, I'm not signing this contract. I'm not doing this because I was not going to get obligated. I have the power to not get obligated. Did I want to make a living? Did I love what I did? I did. But did I want people trying to control everything that I did? That it was turning more into a data situation than me actually meeting with people like I do. So it's like, I'm not doing this. So I've got peace, and I don't feel like I'm selling my soul. You're giving a good example to your daughter, Stacy. Thank you, Angela. Yeah, I think so, but even she doesn't always like my boundaries. Blind Brian, there's just too much out there these days to not know what your kids are doing and watching. My daughter is 31 years old. She's got a good foundation and she's beautiful and she's brilliant and she's bold and she doesn't like me sometimes because I have boundaries, and that's okay. It hurts. I'm not going to say it don't hurt sometimes, but that really, John London, that really resonates, not feeling our own feelings. You were an excellent mother, Stacy. We do the best that we can. We do. And I know my mom did the best she could. She was very young when she got married, because back in those days, people got married young. So they had no business being married. John London, my dad was the same, but in a way it was lucky he left when I was 2, even though he was in and out of my life and caused other issues. I know. My dad was a good man, though. My dad was a good man. He just didn't know how to fix his things. I probably would have, my dad and I got along well before he died. He died at 58 because he was an addict, and he used to, my father had rage issues. He was the only boy in his family, and he was very pampered, because he was the only boy. And so he had like 4 sisters, and he and his dad did mischievous things, and things like that. And so he believed in getting away, but he was an addict too. That's why he had rage issues, because he didn't have control. And so, yeah, so he would have rage issues, but mom had rage issues too. She wouldn't want to own those, but she had them too, because she would yell at him and get in his face. Then he would it was not pretty, Angela. It was not pretty. They both had rage issues. Like you said, codependents get mad, and they think that somebody's thinking disrespectful of them, and sometimes they will even make up the words. Maybe it's the words that they heard from somebody else or something like that. And this becomes a dialogue for children from, to 12 years old. And so this is an imprint. So if they have a parent who's talking bad about themselves in a rage situation, the child becomes afraid of this being them, because the children identify with the parent. Blind Brian, sometimes you got to be cruel to be kind. Definitely have boundaries. I don't know about cruel. I wouldn't say that I'm cruel to anybody, but I definitely have boundaries. She is a beautiful girl, my daughter. She's so smart, and I'm so proud of her. But she doesn't always like me or what have you. But it hurts, but I can't change. I'm not going to be screamed, yelled at, and bucked up to. I'm just not. Do you mean that you couldn't feel your feelings because you were trying to control everyone else's feelings? Yes. Yes, Angela. I would be trying to comfort my mother. I would be trying to not get in trouble with my father, although I didn't, I was the oldest, and I had a brother who he had some problems. And so I couldn't hit that brother, and he was the youngest, so he would be trying to hit on me and fight with me. Miss Stacy can build that boundary while that's right. That's right. I do have people, Flying Brian, that say that I'm able to tell people F you with a smile on my face because I do know how to, like sometimes I'm sitting in a room full of a room full of people, and if I'm, leading the group or what have you, then when somebody's trying to overtalk or overdo or get their point across too harshly, I'm like, and I have that, I'll be like, and they know that I've had men come up to me and tell me, Stacy, I just love the way that you can tell people that, like Kim says, with a smile on my face. Flying Brian, shout out to everyone who remembers their landline number but needs to reset a password they created yesterday. That's funny. That's true. We do that, don't we? John London, good night, Stacy, Robbie, Kim, Angela, everyone. I'll catch up tomorrow and get some sleep. Yes, John London, it's way late where you are. Is it, what's it, about 3 in the morning or something? Get you some rest. And I'm glad that you were here tonight. I'll be back on Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. So that's going to be later in the evening for you. Flying Brian, I called the look. Right? I do have the look. So boundaries help us recognize, the difference. I'd lost my spot again. That's why I have this. Okay. Like Angela was saying, abandonment. We're about to get into this. I think I read the wrong. Okay. Some are afraid the other person will feel rejected, going back to that on the boundaries. They do not want someone else to feel the rejection, hurt, abandonment, or pain that they themselves know so well, but often underneath that concern is something deeper. Many times we're really trying to protect ourselves. We're afraid, what if the other person will think, well, that they'll be upset with me, or they'll reject me, or will they leave? Or will they think I'm selfish, mean, difficult, or uncaring? You're very welcome, John London. I look forward to seeing you next time. And this is often where the wounds get activated. Fear of rejection, shame, abandonment, conflict, not feeling enough, feeling like we're too much. So instead of setting a boundary, we often make up stories. We rationalize, we justify, and we avoid. Not because we're weak, but because boundaries can often activate the exact wounds that created the need for them in the first place. Does that make sense? Did y'all get that? We're afraid of the wounds that the reason why we need boundaries in the beginning. Codependents are also hypervigilant because they're afraid of rejection and monitor yes, they do. Yes, they do. Micromanaging. They're more focused on what you're doing than what they're doing. I know, because I did it. I used to sit at the table and be like, if somebody was very interesting, I'd be like, they're so interesting and I'm not interesting and I'm jealous. They're very comparative codependents. So boundaries often activate the exact wounds that created the need for them in the first place. This is why boundaries can feel so uncomfortable. The people who trigger us are often not villains. I often refer to them as catalysts and not villains. They're catalysts for our growth. Flying Brian, you will never heal the same. That's right. You will not. You're exactly right, Flying Brian. Robbie. Yes, she is spot on. So they're catalysts. If we want to see them as catalysts, because when we're like micromanaging people and waiting for them to do something wrong to prove, get this, to prove our low self-worth, we're monitoring them to prove our low self-worth is what we're doing. And we don't realize we're doing it. Why would we do something like that consciously? We wouldn't. That's why I say sometimes we need somebody to call us on it. My name is Stacy Renee. I'm a mindset coach, KH41. So they help reveal where we still have wounds. The catalysts do. The fears, the blind spots, and opportunities for growth. This is how we begin learning discernment, though. Many of us were not taught discernment. We were taught judgment. Judgment often comes up from fear, ego, defensiveness, and protection. Judgment says they're bad, they're wrong, and they are the problem. Judgment creates separation and often carries a tone of superiority, condemnation, or emotional reactivity. Discernment is different, though, y'all. Discernment is wisdom. Discernment is emotional maturity. The judgment can come from the emotional immaturity that we don't want to claim because it's from our childhood. And so it's that inner childhood wound. We have these inner childhood wounds that don't just go away. They don't just go away. So discernment says, what is true here? Because sometimes I may have my feelings hurt and what somebody actually said was not bad. I may have heard it in a tone that was familiar to me that hurt my feelings. What am I observing? What feels aligned for me? What is healthy or unhealthy? What do I need to feel safe, respected, and clear? This is where we get to learn to discern what boundaries we need to set, how we need to set them. Why are codependents so competitive? It's that low self-worth. And so sometimes when we have low self-worth, it's trying to measure up. A lot of people growing up, I know I grew up thinking I always chose people who were in a worse position than me so that I could have self-esteem. That's a false esteem. But I always chose people that had things worse than me. I didn't always. That's not true, because sometimes I had friends that, they had normal stuff. So I had a couple of friends like that. But I always wanted to rescue those. Let me put it that way. I always wanted to rescue those who had it worse than me. So that justified my problems. So competitive is because of low self-worth. We're comparing. Competitive and comparing are the same thing. So in a way, to a codependent it is. So for example, discernment says, I notice this person repeatedly manipulates situations, so I will set a boundary to protect myself. Judgment says, this person's a horrible person. Discernment allows us to keep our heart open while still protecting ourselves. Judgment often closes the heart. Being in our power is less about judgment and more about discernment. It's learning to see clearly that many of us were not taught to sit with our feelings. See, then you go into that flight, fight, and freeze when you don't want to sit with your feelings. That's your central nervous system acting up. Very insecure. I was very insecure, Angela. I was a codependent and I was very insecure, and I was looking for my worth outside of myself. But self-worth begins with the self. And see, so many of us don't realize that. And that's what I had to learn, is that happiness, self-worth, self-esteem all come from the self. And I have to be able to protect myself. I spent a lot of times trying to protect other people, but I need to protect myself too. I didn't consider myself. So many of us were not taught how to sit with our feelings. If we were allowed to sit with them, we may begin noticing something much simpler. See, sometimes we just complicate our feelings. Robbie, Stacy, you have just made me realize I've been so busy loving everyone else, I forgot to give myself some love. And as we talk about the boundaries, you're very welcome, Robbie. I'm glad that it's helpful. It's to just learn judgment and discernment, because oftentimes we're judging ourselves when we're spewing it out at somebody else, because we're taking on what we think somebody else thinks about us, and we don't know that. See, I had to learn to ask, what does this mean? Just out of curiosity, what does this mean? Because sometimes what I may perceive and what somebody's actually saying is different. So it's about having the courage. But a lot of times people are afraid to ask, what does this mean? Because we're afraid to be asked questions ourselves in fear of looking stupid. At least I did. So if we were allowed to sit with our feelings, we may notice something much simpler, that attraction and repulsion. See, because I talked about the electromagnetic universe. Codependents focus on other people to avoid. Exactly, Angela. Exactly. They focus on other people to avoid looking at themselves. Blind Brian, pride cost us more than hunger, thirst, and gold. Absolutely. So we live in an electromagnetic universe with attraction and repulsion, good, bad, male, female. There's always another side, always another side. And so sometimes we just are blindsided by the truth, right? And so then we don't trust ourselves. So we have to go within ourselves to be able to trust ourselves, so that we're not making decisions that aren't in alignment with us. So then we learn in discernment that this just isn't in alignment with me, when we learn to own that kind of language and that kind of feeling. So we are human beings constantly experiencing preferences, discomforts, attractions, and aversions. That's what we do as humans. is sometimes everything's good until it's not, and it's bad until it's not. This has been my life on life's terms experience, is it's good until it's not, and it's bad until it's not. So not everyone is meant for us, and that's okay. We don't have to be people pleasers, caretakers, and all that, because not everybody's meant for us. Sometimes we have to stay within our scope of reality, okay? So learning is the best part of life. It's an adventure. That's what I learned about life and getting to learn about myself, is that it's an adventure, because then I get to own and claim my own adventures, and I'm not just along for the ride. The pain of being human is emotions. It is. And it's better if we can own our emotions. That's empowering, rather than project them onto somebody else and say, you made me feel this way. That's definitely a codependent term, is you made me feel this way. See, I had to learn in my codependency to say, I feel like this when this happens. And to ask those questions is, what did you mean when you said that, rather than just accuse somebody of saying something that maybe they didn't say. Always an opposite side, black, white, up, down, good, bad. Exactly. Did they gaslight me? I think that a lot of parents were taught to gaslight people, because I'm kind of older, and so they did, did they tell me how to feel and how to think, and did they try to guide me in a way? They did. They did. I mean, but distort my reality is kind of what gaslighting to me is when when you say, I feel like this, and they're like, well, if you feel like this, then, blah, blah, blah. And then, they don't validate your feelings. My parents were 16 and 18 when they got married. So they didn't have a lot of emotional maturity, and both of them, you got to think, when people are 16, 18, or they're so young getting married, they're trying to be grown up, leave the house, and leave all these. They do in a way. I agree with that a lot. Fellowship is that our parents do, because they, you know, my parents did and did not. My dad didn't want me to be an addict like him. He knew he had a drinking problem. He knew he had some problems, and he didn't want me to be like that. Stacks, you made the end of it. Good. I'm glad you're here. Thank you. He didn't want me to be like him. And my mom, I loved my mom. I adored my mom. I still do love my mom and adore my mom. But I had to learn that she was growing on her own coping skills. And I picked up some of those coping skills that weren't healthy for me, you know. So I had to change my coping skills. So learning is a part of this life. Like was said earlier, learning is a part, and the adventure is a part of this life. Stax, I'm glad you made it. So boundaries are often uncomfortable because many of us learn to react from survival states like the flight, fight, freeze, and fawn. We may shut people out, overreact, feel guilty, second guess ourselves, feel bad, withdraw, or become defensive. That's not healthy boundary work. Sometimes we don't know we're doing those things, though. That's why it's good to have somebody to talk to, because I did those things and I didn't know that I was doing those things because I was just like reacting. We don't necessarily think, oh, I'm reacting. And people may tell us you're overreacting. And sometimes when you're dealing with narcissists, you might not be overreacting, and that would be the gaslighting, right, Angela? So that's what gaslighting is when you express your feelings and somebody says you're overreacting. Sometimes we might be. It's going to depend on the situation. And there's so many of us here, I don't know what that would be. But a lot of times in a narcissistic relationship, they will tell you, you're overreacting. I was just joking. But if it's not funny, that's not a joke. That's the thing. Most overreact to every situation. I don't know. I don't think I overreact now to anything. Robbie Mellon. Yes, parents do gaslight sometimes, expecting and telling us to be the best in everything. Does that? Yeah, that does make sense. It does. It does. My father had high expectations of me. My mother's expectations weren't as high, in a way. And in other ways, it was. It was like they weren't on the same page in parenting, and I wasn't on the same page with my ex-husband parenting. Yes, a lot of people are reactive and they don't know because that's your central nervous system. A lot of people grew up. It's just there's, I'm not trying to blame my parents. I had to grow though and discover why I did what I did, why I reacted the way that I reacted. So I had to go rewind the tape and see where I picked these things up. No, I don't have a husband. Flying Brian. Sometimes loneliness is the price you pay for growth. Absolutely. Absolutely. Angela, narcissists make you believe that you were too sensitive. Was your father a narcissist? Sometimes. Sometimes he was, yeah. I don't, yeah, he was a narcissist. He was in his addiction. So my feelings were not convenient. And my parents did come from a generation to where you were taught, that if when you did have some feelings, they'd say, quit crying, I'll give you something to cry about, or dry it up, those kind of things, right? So yeah, my father was a narcissist because he was in his addiction. Hello, Moon. So, I was a narcissist when I was in my addiction. It was all about me, what I wanted, what I needed, and the roof was always falling in, and all of this. I was a drama queen. It was not pretty. So, you know, when we become defensive, that's not healthy boundary work. It's reactivity, right? I had a boyfriend of 10 years that constantly told me I was over emotional. Yeah. If they're like telling you they're kidding and you're very welcome, Angela. Thank you for being here. Yes, Kim. If they, when people are telling you you're over emotional, oversensitive, and things like this, and that's why it's good to have somebody to help you, because I was in my addiction a drama queen. I might have been over emotional because my wounds were festering, right? Is when I was in it, because I was using drugs to cope and using alcohol to cope, and it wasn't working. Everything's good until it's not. At first it worked, and then later it didn't work. So is what because of feminism? I don't know what that means. You're very welcome, Angela. So I talk about loving boundaries. Okay, so as loving boundaries, though they are a thing. So as a child, what I perceived as boundaries may have looked like, and what you might have seen as boundaries may have looked like cars peeling out of the driveways, parents leaving and returning, cussing, verbal abuse. My dad was verbally abusive, emotional withdrawal, abandonment. And this is not what I mean by loving boundaries. That's not loving boundaries. Threatening. How many of y'all been in relationships where somebody would threaten and they threaten and they threaten? See, that's not loving boundaries. Mm-mm. Loving boundaries begin with ourself first. The first boundary is do not react immediately, but also do not sweep something under the rug, right? We have to process. See, a loving boundary with ourself is learning how to process and take time for ourselves instead of having to react immediately. I remember playing football as a kid and parents yelling abuse at their kids for dropping the ball and telling them how useless they were. Aw, that's so mean. That is mean. That's traumatizing. Those poor kids, they probably overperform and do all kinds of things. So the first boundary is do not react immediately, but also just don't sweep stuff under the rug. And do not pretend disturbing behaviors are not disturbing. I mean, all problems in narcissism because of the idea of feminism. No, I don't think that's true because men and women are narcissistic. And I don't think it came because women started standing up for themselves, but because, part of narcissism is being unfaithful. And back in the day when women stayed home with the kids, not everybody was faithful, and women didn't have a choice. They had to put up with abuse and unfaithfulness and all of this kind of thing. So when feminism came and women began working, it didn't mean because women began working that they didn't have to put up with this. And men have to put up with that too. Men have to put up with that too. Some men are working their butts off while their women are out there doing God knows what, So It's not a male female type thing, and I don't think feminism has anything to do with narcissist. I think narcissism has been around since way back when. Way back when. Um, when you had a narcissistic father, you choose a narcissist. Yes, yes, you do, Angela. And a person who's got a lot of problems, a lot of times our partners do mirror our parents. Robbie, I think it actually started with Mel, to be honest. Thank you, Robbie. I might agree with that, but I'm not gonna, I thank you. I appreciate that. Been there, done that, Stacks. Thank you. Keith Reader, thank goodness for, okay, we're not talking about that. Stacks, you can definitely work yourself single. You sure can. You sure can, but sometimes that's a peaceful way. I'm happy being single and peace filled. But yes, when we're, doing things, yeah. I know that now I'm pretty set in my ways, so somebody might be able to say bad things about me. Okay, so do not react immediately. Do not pretend disturbing behaviors aren't disturbing, because what we avoid processing often festers. Remember, last week we talked about when you get a wound on the outside, if you ignore it, it gets infected. The wounds on the inside get infected and fester too. And that's why the codependents do blow up and things like this, because if we don't heal our wounds, whether we're codependent, narcissistic, or whatever, and I was narcissistic, like I said, in my addiction, and even in my codependency to a degree, when I thought everything was about me, that's the same thing that a narcissist thinks, is everything's about me. When I had expectations, that's the same thing that a narcissist does, is they have expectations too. This is why narcissists and codependents are compatible oftentimes, but it can be a catalyst for our growth if we no longer desire to be codependent or narcissist, if we realize this isn't working so well. And then, I learned what's my business, God's business, and somebody else's business. Now, that's empathy typically, and a narcissist doesn't have empathy. That's the thing. And so it's more codependents will try to get help and seek relief for codependency than narcissists will try to seek help for narcissism, because narcissists lack the power, where codependents give away their power. So, like an untreated wound, an emotional pain can become infected with resentment. Ryan Nelson's. Okay, I always hear that. Angela, is your mother your best friend? Many codependents have an obsession. My mother was my best friend. She was. And they do have an obsession with their mothers. And they take on, like I took on a lot of my mom's ideologies. Like my mom was very jealous, and a kid doesn't know what jealousy is until they learn jealousy. She was jealous because my dad was unfaithful, but even when he was being faithful, she was still jealous because she felt like she had to watch him. So in my teenage relationships, when I first got into relationships, I thought it was my responsibility to be watching them to make sure they didn't act wrong. My central nervous system was programmed that way. So I didn't have healthy first relationships either, because I had an expectation of them to mess around on me. I had an expectation of these things because of what I grew up with. So yes, I had an unhealthy, it would be called an unhealthy, because we kind of grew up together. Now she liked that, and I did while it was happening. I was manipulative, and and all of this, but it wasn't healthy. But I love my mom. I still love my mom. Mom, she may be on here watching this, so she didn't know any better because her mom abandoned her. Flying Brian, sometimes the things that break your heart end up fixing your vision. I like that. They sure do. So, Robbie, just saying, back in the day, women were expected to keep the house clean and have children. Thank goodness things have changed a lot these days. I know, right? I know. And, I think that narcissism may have started way back with kings and things like this, that, that men were taught that some of it was a learned behavior. So Eventually, we blow up when we have these unfestered, when we have these infected wounds with resentment. We will blow up, not because of one incident, but because of all the unprocessed ones before that. This is why we have to process our feelings. So it's like stop and process your feelings. If you have a good friend, if you have a friend who has what you want, if they have confidence, if they have strength, then somebody that you trust that doesn't have anything, any kind of attachment in the outcome of things, to have somebody to process this with, a coach, a clergy, a friend who isn't invested in either side. you know it's good to have somebody to process it with. I always tell my girls, process it with me first, because men like things short and to the point. They don't want to hear our whole process. They like it to the point. So the percentage of diagnosed narcissists is very low, but people they do throw that word around a lot. And so that's why I like to say that a lot of us have it when we're throwing that word around. And I don't like to throw it around a lot, because there's emotional immaturity. And this is our inner child with the healing wounds. And I have had emotional immaturity too. I got sober when I was one age, but I had the maturity of a 14-year-old, because that's when I chose to start coping with drugs and alcohol. So I had the maturity of the 14-year-old because I didn't cope with things when in a normal way. I didn't learn in a healthy way to start coping with things, because my dad being an addict, I learned addictive behavior to escape. So that's what I did until it didn't work anymore. So I didn't want my kids to grow up in that, So the first boundary we set is with ourselves, to stop and process. That's the first boundary, not to react, but to stop and process, to breathe, darling. We're going to breathe here shortly in a few minutes. And that breathing, instead of reacting, we learn to pause. It's that having that boundary with ourselves. I'm going to pause. I used to teach martial arts, and I taught little kids, and we would teach them to breathe, because kids can be very reactive, And so we taught the kids how to breathe. I would tell them, and look, when you breathe, your chest opens. See, what happens is when we experience trauma over and over, we become kind of like, our posture gets bad, because we're just trying to shield ourselves from the pain, right? Without really knowing that's what we're doing, but we're trying to shield ourselves from the pain. So opening up, breathing. And then we told the kids, see how smart you look when you sit up straight and you do your breathing, and you breathe, and then you're right in this present moment. You're not in the fear, because human beings fear what that we're not going to get what we want. We fear we're going to lose something that we have. So instead of reacting, we learn to pause, we learn to breathe, we learn to process. What am I afraid of? What is the fear here? Is there a fear here? Am I afraid of being wrong? Am I a perfectionist? Because we pick up perfectionism if we come from a home that is overcritical. So sometimes processing requires another healthy perspective. Healthy perspective. Sometimes what I heard through my wounded child was not actually what was said, is what I'm trying to say. Is sometimes that, if, like, I've shared this before, but I'm going to share it because I had a boyfriend who couldn't hear out of one ear. And so when he one time told me, Stacy, if you want to speak to me, you're going to have to speak up. Because my wounded child, when I was going to have tough conversations or whatever, and when my wounded child wanted to set boundaries, maybe I set boundaries with a low voice like this because I wasn't sure if they would be observed, and I didn't really want to get rejected, and I really was scared to set a boundary, so it really showed. And he said, Stacy, if you want to speak to me, you're going to have to speak up. What I heard was, come on, spit it out, because that's what my dad used to say to me. He'd say, come on, spit it out, because I stuttered as a child because I was nervous. So he'd say, come on, spit it out. So when this man told me, Stacy, if you want to speak to me, you're going to have to speak up, I heard, and so I was insulted. I thought he was like up here and I was down here. And the reason I felt like that he was talking to me like that was my inner child. Instead of speaking up, guess what I did? I started even speaking lower because I got scared, because it reminded me of my dad saying that. And then he's told me, Stacy, why are you being passive aggressive? Because I did the opposite of what he asked me to do, right? And so I didn't even know what passive aggressive was. So then I go to therapy and I tell the therapist, and she's like, "Oh yeah." She said, "Stacy, why didn't you just speak up? The man can't hear." It was a lot simpler than what I had attached to it with my pain. Does that make sense? A lot fellowship. There's nothing wrong. I don't think he was saying there was anything wrong with it, but there has been times when, I think most women are very happy when they can have children. A lot of women aren't happy when they've had children. A lot of women back in the day before birth control, which is kind of this part, is they would get pregnant, and they didn't want all these children. Now people have birth control, so they can control that better. But I don't know that it was meant that they didn't believe that. God did make women to have children, and if they want to, that's good. If they can stay home and take care of them, that's good too. But a lot of times they're not respected when they stay home and take care of their children, not by the children and not by the husband, because if the husband doesn't respect them, then the children aren't going to respect them either. So, and sometimes the husband, because of the role he was learned, that he had to take care of everything and he feels pressure, he may come home and actually exert unearned guilt to the wife or the children, because if he's had a bad day, who's going to get the brunt of it? So, great boy. Our earth is thriving. Well, that's very good news, Rare. Hey, Rare, it's good to see you. Robbie, after my partner cheated on me, it damaged me for over 20 years with my trust issues. Took me a long time to trust again. I'm single, most likely from that trauma. So, who is the boss lady? I don't know. Kim is taking care of my moderating. Great boy. It's not okay. Robbie. Oh, Rare, come on now. Rare. Okay. Flying Brian, don't piss off the host. She could probably kick your butt. Thank you, Flying Brian. I sure could. I don't know about on here, but we could certainly put them in timeout, right? Robbie, I'm a dude. What? Okay, come on, y'all. We're gonna be breathing here pretty soon. If you overcome thoughts, no words can ever hurt you. You will never blame anyone or anything again. Have a great night, all. Well, thank you a lot, fellowship. Blind Brian, Stacy, thanks so much for sharing your time and energy. Hope to catch your next live. Take care. Thank you, Flat and Brian. I'm glad that you got to be on here tonight. Thank you. I appreciate that. Appreciate you being here. We're about to finish up, so. All right. Sometimes what I learned was wounded child was actually, as not what was said. So other times something was generally dismissive, manipulative, or emotionally twisted, and I rationalized it. See, sometimes I rationalize some throwed off stuff because I didn't know what verbal abuse was for a long time. That's why support matters. My therapist had to tell me, Stacy, you need to go home and look up verbal abuse. A trusted person, a coach, a therapist, someone healthy who has no vested interest and has the kind of life or emotional health you desire. Hello, chosen law. So someone who has no investment in the kind of life and emotional health you desire. So healthy support helps us see more clearly. Boundaries with ourselves are thoughtful, not reactive. Boundaries help us to learn self-love and self-esteem. That's a part of self-love and self-esteem, is to have some healthy boundaries, to learn healthy boundaries. You might not have learned healthy boundaries. This is why we need somebody to teach us healthy boundaries. Boundaries with ourselves are thoughtful and not reactive. Boundaries help us learn self-love and self-esteem. Boundaries, because self-esteem starts with self, right? You must be able to consider yourself. Boundaries aren't rules and they're not punishments. That's not what a boundary is. Boundaries are clarity. They help us to get honest about what we want, what we need, and what feels aligned and what does not work for us. So boundaries help us negotiate instead of feeling compromised. Many people who make the mistake of turning boundaries into rigid rules. I encourage clients to start simply. Okay, Rodolfo. So many people, make the mistake of start simply. Do not create an entire rule book overnight, okay? that often creates more resistance and disconnection. People generally do not respond well to someone suddenly arriving with a list of rules. Do you? I don't respond well. That's usually a repulsive, and that, can sometimes be narcissistic when people think that they are so important they need to give you some rules. So we want to work together. I would think most of us want mutuality. Mutuality. We don't want to have one superior and one down here. We've already done that. Sometimes we've done the superior part and put them down here. So boundaries are healthier when they are mutual, rational, and clear. This is a part of self-discovery. It's okay to learn what is and is not for you. That's the adventure of this life. It's okay if not everything is for you. The clarity helps you recognize more easily what actually is. Boundaries are a form of self-love. The boundary from defensiveness, the boundary from assuming, the boundary from reacting impulsively. Tuning in from Minnesota. Well, I'm glad that you're here. Thank you, Chosen Law. We're almost done, but not yet. We've been talking about, obviously, boundaries. These boundaries help you find your voice because the next step is learning to ask yourself better questions. Without self-knowledge, many of us swing from one extreme to another. This is why support is so helpful while learning boundaries. Support helps us to interrupt patterns, break cycles, and stop spiraling. This week, we begin simply learning to stop, breathe, process emotions, and identify your feelings. Strikingly handsome and police to everyone who is polite to me. Hope that helps you. All right, very good. Thank you, Robbie Rodolfo. That term, self-love. Okay, so yeah, we'll be pulling out the feeling wheel next week so that we can identify these feelings. I have a feeling wheel that, on one side, we get this one side of feelings. Like when I learned jealousy, I did not learn admiration, but jealousy and admiration are on the same energy wavelength. Just jealousy is negative and admiration is positive. Do something productive for you and the environment instead. Okay. All right, Juice Slayer, you're not very nice. We're about to breathe. Y'all ready to breathe, Robbie? Who else is here? Chosen Law, Rodolfo. Who else is still here? Rayer. I don't know if Rayer's still here. All right. Well, we're going to breathe. Kim, are you still here? Yes. She's still here. Yay. All right. Thank y'all for still being here. And Angela, thank you. They sure did come. I think it's time for us to set a boundary and breathe and leave. Are you going to breathe with us, Angela? We're going to breathe 5 times, 5 breaths, and just to relax ourselves, to relax our nerves, to relax our central nervous system, because your respiratory system, cardiovascular system, and digestive system are all part of your nervous system. And when we get this red alert, that's what all starts acting. Okay, so let's just breathe and relax into this evening. All right, so here we grow. So we're going to do 5 of them. Like I said, we're going to take a deep breath in, fill up our tummy, our stomach will rise, our heart will open, our chest, our shoulders will be up, our head will be up. Hold it for 4 counts if that's comfortable. If not, just do your best. And then release out of your mouth gently and slowly. Here we go. Let's breathe in freedom. And then release anything that makes us feel like we're overwhelmed and overworked and overloaded. Okay, so breathe in. Hold it. And release. Breathe. Hold it. And release. Breathe in. Hold it. Right this moment, everybody's safe. Helps you establish safety and release. Breathe in. Hold it. Release. Last one. Breathe in. Hold it. And release. Alrighty. Thank you so much. All right. I hope that calmed the central nervous system. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, I encourage you to. I enjoyed all the participation tonight. If you participated, I really enjoyed that. Please subscribe to this channel so next time I come on. Thank you, Kim. Next time, thank you for being an awesome moderator. Y'all, let's give Kim a hand wherever you are. I appreciate that. Give her your hearts. That's right. So thank you all for being here and participating. And please subscribe if you were on here tonight and you enjoyed this kind of content. If you feel like it will help somebody else, please spread the word. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you, Robbie. Good, good. Much love to you too. Thank you. All right. Y'all have a wonderful night or day wherever you are. Thank you for all those hearts. Bye, Rodolfo. Thank you so much for being here. Good night, y'all.